Hello, and welcome back to our third and final lecture of semester 2. And today we will be looking in more detail at the processes and how to get started in earnest on your dissertation project. So to recap what we've done so far, uh, basically in the first session and the first lecture, you were introduced to the project that is the dissertation. And the lecture 2 enabled us to look at various ways and techniques for finding and refining your research topic. And after that, you had the opportunity last week to, in small subgroup, to start looking at what a good dissertation was like in your particular discipline. Okay, now in order to wrap this up today, what I would like to do, as I said, is to look at the processes involved in carrying out a dissertation project. And we will be focusing on some aspects, more particularly to get you started, such as the literature review. So the aims of today are going to be to look at some of the general issues that have been thrown up by the proposals that have been already submitted. And if you have not yet submitted your proposal, may I urge you to actually do it as soon as possible. I know the absolute deadline is on the 26th, but the sooner you can get these proposals to either myself or to your program director, depending on what program you're on, the more quickly we can actually match you up with a suitable supervisor, and therefore the more quickly you can get started. Okay, so another thing we'll be looking at in a little bit more detail today will be, as I said, to get started properly with your dissertation. And this means obviously looking a little bit at the literature review and what that entails. I'll also be talking about the processes and the procedures involved with carrying out this project. We will be briefly touching upon the ethics involved in doing research work and trying to understand what's included in the ethical dimension of that particular type of work, and how we can go about making sure that we all take an ethical stance when we carry out research. Okay, and then finally we will be looking at the deadlines, which are obviously very important, and the ones you have to work towards before you submit your dissertation in September. Okay, so first of all, a word about the dissertation proposals that have been coming in. I think that it's important to actually look at those issues, and there are many common issues amongst those proposals, things we see again and again, shall we say. And it's important to look at them because it is the sort of issues that if you take them, into your dissertation and carry on into your dissertation work without having a clear knowledge about how to deal with certain matters, then that will create problems later on for you. So it's better to actually preempt some of these issues if we can at this stage. And as I say, I'll be talking generically in terms of what it is we have seen, as far as the proposals coming in are concerned. Now, the one clear and obvious thing is that is the need to demonstrate a gap in the literature. Why is this important? Well, it is important because it enables you to establish the ground for your own dissertation topic and focus. And basically, this is what helps you to justify the need for doing your research, isn't it? So there is a gap or several gaps in terms of knowledge in the area you are interested in. you need to identify them very precisely, and then tell us how you are going to address it. The more precise the gap identification and the more precise your focus, the better the dissertation. I understand that it is probably still a little bit hazy at this stage, and therefore you will not know, you won't have boundaries exactly around your literature, and you won't know exactly what the gaps look like. But it's very important that at the stage, by the time you have finished your literature review, we are very clear where those gaps are. Another important thing is up-to-date literature. I guess this goes without saying, but perhaps it is worth saying, because quite often I see students that are quoting very relevant journal articles or papers or sources, but sources that are dated. And it can be a problem, especially if you are looking at very, classic topics such as leadership, for example, etc., which have been researched for, I would say, more than a century. What we really want to know is, what are the recent debates in that particular area, and what are the most to-date approaches to understanding some leadership problems, and what are the concerns, with particular approaches, etc. In the last recent years, because obviously a research, always built upon previous research. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, recent literature, say the last 5 years, is really very important to include in your dissertation. And obviously that never precludes you from citing a seminal, a very important paper that has been foundational in the field and that is much older. But you need to make sure that the bulk of your research is reasonably recent. Now, the other thing is, of course, you need to convince us of the importance of your study. In other terms, why should we care to read your dissertation? What is the interest? What's in it for us? So you need to demonstrate that it is really important to research your topic, and in that sense, why you're doing this, what knowledge are you hoping to bring to this topic you're researching, and for what purpose, for that matter. So is it to help practitioners improve the way they approach such problems? Is it to create new theory, or hopefully both? Is it to improve current theory? In other terms, you need to sell your project and capture the reader's interest in your project. And that comes in pretty much within the introductory section. We need to be hooked as soon as we start reading your dissertation. Now, another thing that is clearly problematic for a number of students is understanding the different philosophical approaches and how they align to particular data collection methods. So I've had, on quite a few occasions, students that mismatch the type of philosophical approach and the relevant collection method. So, for example, it's not uncommon to see a student stating that they have adopted a constructionist approach in order to probe a phenomenon such as trust, say, in depth, and that they are going to send a survey to about 100 people, hoping to get, that sort of responses, and then they will analyze it through SPSS. Well, unfortunately, these two things don't go together. If you are taking a constructionist approach, you are going to look at the social world and social phenomena in a particular way, looking at in-depth aspects, answering questions such as why is this happening, etc. You will not be very successful in doing this if you are using survey methods. So it's really, really important to understand how the different philosophical approaches what they stand for, shall we say, and how they correspond to different views of a social world, and how they align to specific and particular data collection methods. So speaking very, very broadly, if you are looking at interpretivism, for example, you would be having methods associated with this, such as focus groups, ethnography, observations, and very often in the case of the type of dissertations you are doing, in-depth interviews. So you'll be looking at a phenomenon in depth, and you'll be trying to answer questions such as, why is this happening in this particular context? On the other hand, if you're looking at positivism, then the methods associated with that tend to be the collection of quantitative data, okay, that will be analyzed using statistical techniques, or carrying out experiments, which again will be analyzed, in a scientific way. So whereas, for example, pragmatism can be associated, or tends to be associated, with mixed methods. So really, I would strongly suggest that if you have any doubts, you try to review these notions, first of all, in, shall we say, the research methods manuals that have been advised to you, particularly on your research methods module. And if you still got some doubts, obviously your supervisor will then be the person you need to discuss those matters with, okay? But it's very important that both philosophical approaches and data collection methods are aligned, because that conditions the quality of the rest of your dissertation. Now, the other thing you need to think about as well is whether the method you are using is actually the best method to use. Okay, so is that the best way to solve your problem? Again, this is something you can discuss with your supervisor. Closely connected to the method you have chosen, you need to ask yourself, it could be the right method to actually to solve the kind of questions, to answer the kind of questions you are considering, but there may be problems in terms of accessing the data. And that is a practical aspect that needs to be, I would say, considered quite early on. Every year, and I do say every year, there are unfortunately a few students, very few, generally, that find that everything is in place, and in terms of their approach, their methods, and the type of data they want to collect, except that the access is either difficult or impossible, and they end up with, I would say, partial data sets. So a dose of realism as to how easy, or I mean, obviously you can't predict everything, but you need to think how easy it is going to access the data you want to access with the methods you've actually chosen. Then finally, just touching upon ethics, so I'll come back to this a little bit later. It is important that you can carry out your research in an ethical manner, and that you consider ethical, concerns, and that you are able to think about what they may be. So some of them, for example, can concern the subject you've chosen itself. Some subjects are sensitive, so mental health, is sensitive. Self-harm is sensitive as a topic to look into. I mean, I'm not saying you'll be looking into this, but it's just an example of a topic that is sensitive from an ethical perspective, and you need to bear that in mind. Now, it's not just a subject that can be sensitive, but settings are also can be really, really difficult from an ethical point of view. So it's very difficult to be able to do any research in healthcare without having an extensive ethical review process beforehand, which is completely outside the scope of your dissertation. This is simply because people in a healthcare settings in healthcare settings are patients, actually, and patients are considered vulnerable. So the very subject you are researching is a vulnerable subject, and therefore this brings, different dimensions to bear on your research. So I was talking about subjects and being vulnerable. Now, some respondents can present this problem even if they are outside a particular setting. So if you think, for example, of doing any research on children or adults with difficulty making decisions for themselves because of their, I would say, mental abilities, then those respondents, again, will be considered vulnerable. And it will be very difficult, well, it will be impossible to do any research without going through a fully blown ethical review process, which generally, as I say, it is normally outside the scope of your dissertation because it can take anything from 6 months to a year. So as you can well imagine, this is not something, you can do given the timescales of your dissertation. Okay, so moving on. So I would like to now look at what examiners are looking for in a dissertation. And this is a reminder because we have discussed this a little bit in previous lectures. But basically, what we want to see as examiners and what we are looking for is evidence that you have selected a worthwhile subject, okay? The need for which has been well justified when you introduce a topic. We are also looking for very clear boundaries around your topic. Okay, something that starts as a diffuse topic, something that is vague or too broad, will end up with vague and broad conclusions. It can't happen any other way. Okay, so very important to have a very clearly bounded, reasonably narrow, and reasonably very focused topic. And then what we're also looking is at is the expected contribution. So what it is you're hoping to bring to us in terms of knowledge whilst carrying out this research, or as a result of having carried out your research. Originality. Now, we have looked at this notion in lecture 2. And as we've seen, it can manifest itself in different ways. So it can be a new topic, a new method to gather data on said topic, or indeed a new concept or a new perspective on a subject stemming from a different theoretical perspective, or from even a very different discipline. Okay, or of course, new findings as well are a measure of originality. So there are many different ways in which your project can be original. Okay. Now, we also look at the way your work is organized, and it needs to, your dissertation needs to flow in a certain way, both structurally and conceptually. And by this, I means it needs to be structured in a recognizable way, and a way that's easy to follow. And that means, for example, chapters in a certain order that are linked one to the other, conceptually. Okay, and then there needs to be as well a narrative thread, and this is more the sort of conceptual fluid sort of way we can look at your dissertation as well. So that narrative thread takes the reader on a discovery journey and tells a story, basically. And the best dissertations have both of those things very clearly in place. Another thing, of course, is I'm sure you do realize, but it's worth stressing again, is that you need to be able to manage your own work, your own timetable, and take responsibility for your dissertation. Ultimately, it is your work. You need to own it, and take responsibility for everything that happens, including the delays, the procrastination, the changes you may make at the last minute, etc. This is your work. This is something I'm sure you'll be very proud of once you finish, but it is all yours. It's your supervisor will not you know, it will help you, he or she will help you along the way, but they will not do it for you. Now, another thing is, and that concerns more the literature review, which is the first part, but by no means the easiest part, by the way, is that you need to interpret the literature and the data using your own ideas. It's not good enough to just describe the literature, and that will purely descriptive literature review won't get you very high marks. So you need to basically interpret this in the context of your own research topic, through your own cultural lens, if relevant, through various other means you have at your disposal. But we need to hear your voice, basically, as a researcher. Now, that's linked to the next point, which is engaging with theory, concepts, and research models. You don't need to worry about being critical. If you think a study is not particularly impressive, just say so. Obviously, you need to justify your views as to why you think it's, you know, rubbish. But you are perfectly entitled to have your views, provided you can justify it. Provided you can justify something in research, you're having quite a lot of freedom to say what you think. And as I said before, we need to hear your voice as a researcher. This is really important. Okay. Now, methodological rigor. Well, you need to apply the methods or method you have chosen appropriately. So that's according to the techniques and conventions that are used in terms of this particular method. So if you are using, for example, statistical approach to analyze your data, as you well know, there are a number of rules about the type of test you can carry out, the size of a sample, some ways of choosing samples, various ways of choosing samples, and their pros and cons, etc., etc. You need to be on top of your methods, okay, in terms of when you apply them. And we will be looking for this as well. Now, before you panic entirely, because you say, oh, I'm nowhere near that stage yet, there will be some summer workshops to help both with quantitative techniques and qualitative techniques as well. So don't worry too much about that. And they are scheduled right about at the time when you'll be starting to gather your data. So by then you would have had some chance to do a little bit of reading about them, and then maybe have questions at the ready. Okay. Now you need to finally, but it's an important point, you need to take an objective stance as to what are your findings really, and what data you've gathered, and be guided by the evidence, whichever way it points, meaning that even if, for example, the data does not support the hypothesis you have decided to test, well, you can still discuss it, okay? This is a finding in itself. So compare it with the literature and generate some insights, okay? And that means you still will have been able to make a contribution on the topic, even though the hypotheses you started with are not met. You still found something of importance. It's up to you to make sure the reader is aware of that and why. So what we are also looking for is for you to have been able to engage in the dissertation process and to manage the dissertation process in a holistic way, shall we say. And so for this is, although this is presented as a circle, which moves from identifying a problem to exploring the current literature, etc., it's not linear. So it is you will step back as part of your work on the dissertation. You do go backwards and forwards. This is entirely normal. Okay, don't think it's don't think you are going about it the wrong way. Okay, it is perfectly okay to revisit the literature at a certain stage, and once you start to have the data coming in, for example. But what we are looking at overall is a complete product, so this is why the holistic mention of that process. So we need to be clear that you've gone through that process, and you demonstrate understanding of what it is you have been doing. Okay. So getting started. This is more or less where you are at. So you've written a proposal, you've identified research problems and the foundations for the study. I think that what you need to realize is that, and as I've just mentioned, actually, the process of research is very iterative. So you will come back onto the research problem because, and your findings may sort of lead you to amend or at least rejig your research questions. It very much depends on what your findings are. Okay, and similarly, you may come back and need to have a second view at the literature, or indeed at some extended literature because of what data you have found. So bear in mind that you will be going backwards and forwards in terms of these different stages. Okay. And bear in mind also that it's not everything goes according to plan. So there will be delays along the way. There will be times where you think, my goodness, I don't know what to do next. I feel lost. This is not how I planned it. That's quite normal, and that's part and parcel of conducting research. Now, the main person you'll be able to talk to will be at this stage your supervisor, and they are very experienced researchers, and I'm sure they'll be able to guide you. But don't expect a perfectly fluid and flawless process, because it's very rare that you encounter that when doing a dissertation. So first thing first, what do you need to do now, or next, should I say? Well, you need to do your literature review, i.e. get reading. And you're going to need to read. You're going to need to read a lot, actually, and to engage with the literature. And as this quote, I don't know where it comes from, but it's certainly something that fits, I think, the activity. A literature review is deep, complex, and never-ending. Now, a word of caution on the never-ending. So I think you have to be careful on this one, because clearly there's always the temptation to read the next article that's going to be just what's going to bring you the best insight, etc., etc. You need to set boundaries, both boundaries around what it is you read about, okay, but also boundaries in terms of time. You can't carry on doing your literature review for 6 months. You need at some point to say, okay, that's what I've got, and that's how summarize the findings, okay, identify the gaps, and then move on. Okay, that's very, very important. And it's not always easy to do because there is always, as I say, the temptation to read on and on. Now, the purpose of a literature review itself is, as mentioned earlier, is to provide a foundation for your study. So if you get this right, it will actually, set you really well for the rest of a dissertation, because you will have quite really very clear boundaries and a very clear focus, and you'll know where you are going in terms of the questions you are researching, the gaps that needs to be filled, etc., that need to be filled, etc., etc. But it's not a straightforward process, and also bear in mind that by the end of that literature review, you'll probably be the expert on your topic. Okay, probably almost certainly even more than your dissertation supervisor, unless they happen to be an expert at researching this very topic. But this is not always the case, okay? And you will know what the key debates are, and you will be able to tell us succinctly what those key debates are, and why, you know, they are still lacking in terms of you know, a certain aspects of knowledge that hasn't been touched upon or hasn't been dealt with in certain manner, etc., etc. So you'll become a specialist, and it's important to for you to realize that. One thing which is very important in the literature review is to not just describe it, as I said before, but to critically analyze it. Now, there will be a workshop in June, and this is the first workshop of a summer term that shows you how to research a literature. We bring in one of our experts from the library. So they show you how to research a literature and also how to go about doing a critical analysis of a literature. And it's very important that it is an analysis, not a description. And it's important that this literature review is done correctly, because what you really want to avoid is duplication. You don't want to carry out some research, even if it's a very good piece of research, only to find out that something so similar to what you've been doing has been done before that it almost entirely invalidates the originality aspect of your work. Okay? So how to start this process? Well, you need to, again, as I say, this workshop in the summer will help you in detail in terms of how to do that. But you can start thinking about it, and also reading in research methods manuals, you know, guidance as how to go about it. What you need to do is to identify the key terms that are associated with your topic, and then use a number of databases to carry out the search. And we'll be looking at a few in a minute, but you need to explore the references, identifying key journal articles. And so think about what are the key journal articles in your area. So if you research management, some key journals are, for example, the Academy of Management, or Organization Studies, or Journal of Management. All of those are top-ranking journals in the ABS list, which you must have heard about and which I think is available to you. Now, if you are researching marketing, look at the Journal of Marketing as a top journal, etc. So look at top journals and identify key references around your topic. Okay. The other thing is of course to make note as you read, as you go along and as you read. Otherwise, you'll be reading, you'll find that really interesting, and you'll be reading the next article and the next one, and then you forget what the first one was about. Well, you see what in detail, shall we say. So very important to keep to be very organized about this literature review and to keep notes. Keep also very good records of what you have read. It's easy to lose track of the publications you've read. I've done it myself. A number of experienced people have done it until we've learned that be very, very organized in terms of keeping records of what journals you've read. Okay. Then so that would it be only to make sure that you can find the articles again. There are some useful references, reference tools such as EndNote or Mendeley, and they can help you when you finally put your list of reference together. So think about that. And I think that EndNote at the very least is available through the library. I think Mendeley is available. It's free anyway, but this is a very helpful tool to manage your ever-growing list of references. So what are those tools for doing the search? Well, you have general search engines such as Google Scholar. It's fine, but this is Google Scholar is not very specific, so you may get an awful lot of things that come up associated with a topic, and it might be just too broad. The library catalog is another. I'm not saying you shouldn't use Google Scholar, but be aware that it's not, very focused tool. You have a library catalog, you have a databases, and then you have various different sources such as Scopus, Web of Science, Nexus, uh, sort of dedicated resources for such as Passport for data and market research reports, for example, or UK Data Service for statistics, or FAME for financial data, although that mostly deals with UK companies. So basically, there are a lot of tools available to you in the library. I should also say that the library are running workshops for which you need to book on how to do a number of things, including doing library searches. So I have been putting a note on Minerva a few days ago, which was an invitation from the library services to look at what they had to offer for the rest of a semester and book what may be relevant to your needs. Okay, but this advice carries on for the summer term because they will have a number of workshops that will be delivered on a number of topics. Aim for obviously the postgraduate workshops that will be more specifically dedicated to you and what you're doing. So how do you know if it's a key article? Well, I mean, one clear way to check this is to check the citation index. Okay, so this tells you how many times it has been cited, and it can indicate how central it is to the topic. And this actual citation index is actually a very good tool for doing a systematic literature review. If you, for example, although this is not very common amongst our students, if you do a desk-based research as opposed to a field work, that can help you to analyze all the results for you. Okay. Back to the what to think about when you are doing all this reading. Well, it's very important to, the description of what you are reading is clearly very important. So you need to know who the author is, what the purpose is, what are the findings, what methodology has the author used, and what are his main arguments. Okay, so that's the content basically of a paper. But what it is we are going to really look at when we assess your literature review is your analysis of such papers. So basically, how do you assess what you've read? Do you think the evidence is sound? Does it look reliable? Or is it indeed relevant to your particular focus? What do you think the author was actually using the right methodology? Are you convinced by his or her argument? And if you're not, tell us why. And that's really when we really get a feel that you acquire a certain voice, if you see what I mean. And so on and so forth. Are there any explicit or hidden bias in what this author has done and they haven't cited it? Okay. Are the conclusions reasonable given what has been presented, or are they a bit, stretched? And hand in hand with the analysis goes the evaluation. Okay, so your evaluation of this particular paper. So what can be learned from it? Why is it so significant? Or is it significant indeed? What do you think? So what's your position on the subject? And how, very important last point, how does this link with other texts you have read? Some people can very clearly are very clearly able to do the description and the analysis of the paper and the evaluation, but they don't take the time or the trouble to link it to the rest of the literature review, and then it becomes a little bit fragmented and it doesn't read so well. So if you're able to really do the analysis and the evaluation of the sources you are reading particularly well, that's where most of the high grades come from. So think about this. Again, there will be a summer, that will be the first summer workshop to be sort of offered to you. We are hoping for mid to end of June. Okay, and as I mentioned before, please do look at what's available at Skills at Library, because you can book yourself on those workshops, and they are generally very instructive. I mean, students say every year that they do benefit from them. Now, back to ethics. So there is a formality, there are formalities, okay? And in terms of ethics, that means that you need to complete a particular form prior, I repeat, prior to carrying out your fieldwork, okay? Now, this needs to be checked and signed by your supervisor. It may well be that depending on how you answer some questions, for example, if you know some of your respondents other than for the purpose of that of the research project, it may well be that you will require light touch ethics approval. But I don't think, as I've mentioned before, and for the reasons mentioned before, full ethical approval is a possibility, given that it takes up to, as I say, between 6 and 12 months, and it will be far too long. You know, you would have finished, you would have had to end in your dissertation before you have had the ethical approval. So that means that you need to be very careful about what you do or what you choose to do in terms of your research. So, for example, try to avoid sensitive topics, okay? A very simple example, actually, is researching, you know, having respondent under 16. Now, I have a number of students, undergraduate students, that have been researching or keen to research a particular phenomenon in the context of Generation Z, okay? Now, the youngest ones are below 16 in that generation. So automatically that would mean a full ethical approval, which clearly can't be done. So you have to be careful in terms of what you aim to do, okay? Now, the risk assessment. Now, normally, if you collect data of campus in person, you have to fill in a form, making sure that you understand what the risks are to yourself, the researcher, and that you have adequately planned for this and in order to mitigate them. It is clear that under the current conditions, and I'm talking about summer term 2021 here, we strongly advise for all data to be collected remotely. And in this case, this form is not required. Okay. So, but I think that as we speak, so this is about the formality around ethics. So think about what may be the ethical implications for your work, and think about, for example, if you want to, say, picking up on my previous example, if you want to carry out research on a particular demographics, okay, Generation Z or Z, then you may need to think about how you are going only to consider one portion of that particular generation, and you need to justify it, obviously, in theoretical terms, not just because it's not practical to carry out research with under 16. Okay, right. Now, why are ethics so important, and have they always been very important? Now, this is one of the extreme but real example. This is not made up. This is a real example of which you may have heard about, that was done in the 60s. And the matter of ethics in terms of a number of studies carried out, you know, I would say in the 50s, 60s, etc., are important because I think that some of these studies will probably would not go past ethical approvals today. Okay, now so let's look at what happened here and what was this famous study. and why is it famous in terms of ethics in particular. So basically, we had a sociology PhD student who decided to study men who were having sex with other men in public restrooms, okay, called tea rooms. Now, you have to bear in mind that homosexuality was illegal at the time. So basically, what this researcher was observing was criminal behavior. Okay. Now, what this student did, he was acting as watch queen, meaning that he was, basically watching, keeping watch while certain other things were happening in those restrooms and letting know the participant if somebody was coming. Okay. Now, the man involved did not know he was a researcher. Okay, so you can think what that may mean already in terms of ethics. Now, to compound the matter, this student recorded their car license plates and was then able to find out their addresses. So a year later, he went to the home of 50 of those men and he pretended that he was a social health researcher and he interviewed them under false pretenses to gain more information about their marital status, sexuality, sexual orientations, occupations, etc. Now, I think that by now you have gathered some kind of view as to what may have been wrong here, okay? And there were many things that were wrong from an ethical point of view. Well, first of all, he observed them without taking informed consent. So participant didn't know who he was and certainly didn't agree to be observed. Okay. The next thing, which is barely believable nowadays from an ethical point of view, is that he identified his subjects. And so therefore the participant could be identified when reporting the study. And then he went out to find further information about these people, putting them at risk in particular because they could have lost their jobs. They could have been put in prison. Remember that it was criminal behavior at the time. Okay, it was illegal to be homosexual at the time. And so he had the potential to inflict serious harm on of various nature on his on the people he was researching, and all of that unbeknown to them. Okay. And then obviously there could have been potential harm to the researcher as well, although I think that the main potential for harm here was mostly to do with the subject being researched. So there are clearly quite a lot of implications from that study. Needless to say that it would not be possible to carry out such a study today without, this will not pass ethical approval. It goes without saying. So basically, coming back to, let's say, our setting and what you need to consider in ethical terms. Well, you need to consider the potential cause harm to yourself or others. And you need, but something which is essential is you need to obtain, so you need to make sure that your study doesn't have, doesn't present such potential, okay? You need to gather informed consent. This is absolutely essential, okay? And this normally takes the form of, if you send a questionnaire, that will be basically as part of that will be the first page on your questionnaire, and you'll ask for if you are carrying out a survey, it's mentioned on the first page, and you ask the respondent to tick a box saying that they consent. Okay. Similarly, if you carry out interviews face to face, or much more likely, given the conditions we are in via Zoom, then you need to inform at the very beginning, prior to you starting your questionnaire, you need to inform the participant and get them to sign a form indicating, or virtually sign a form indicating consent. Okay. The next thing you obviously need to do is to preserve their anonymity. So those, none of your data must enable whoever reads your dissertation to trace back what has been said or what information has been given to a particular participant, or indeed group of participants. Okay. They need to they need to participate voluntarily, but they also need to be informed that they are able to withdraw from participating in your survey or interview at any point. And this is without having to justify the reason or reasons why. Okay. And then the final point, which is really important, is you need to consider where you're going to store your data and how you're going to manage it from the point of view of sort of safety of data and anonymity in particular. So if you're in any doubts about how safe your data storage arrangements are, don't hesitate to discuss them with your supervisor or anybody else you think might help. Okay. So coming back to managing the dissertation task, plan with your supervisor, very important. You're going to be very busy throughout this the period of your dissertation, but so is your supervisor. And I think it's very important that you have an understanding as how you intend to meet, how often. It can be flexible, but it's good to have some kind of planning to start with. You need to agree the milestones as well with them. Okay, so you have one milestone built in, which is you have to submit. Well, you are allowed to submit. It's not compulsory. Draft chapters in July. Okay, but other than those, the milestones are to be agreed between you and your supervisor. And please do allow time for checking your document at the end of just before, I would say, submission. Allow more than 1 day or 2 days. Allow sufficient time for thoroughly checking your documents. There is no excuse for leaving typos, etc. Okay. Set procedures in place for the practicalities, data collection, recording, backups. Do backup your work. Do create several backups of your work. It's amazing what can go lost, you know, that it would be a tragedy if you had all this data and you had no copies, or the copy you had got lost, etc., etc. Very important that you have contingency plans in place. Okay. And then set up, you know, arrangements with colleagues for support, chat, study groups, literature, questions that may arise. You are all doing the same sort of thing, and it's more than likely that somebody else along the line has come across exactly the same problem. They may have found a way to solve it. It's good to talk. So it is good if you can have a small collaborative bubble, shall we say, where you can exchange, even if it's light-hearted exchanges, you know, and if when you get very fed up, and you will get very fed up at some point, it's also good to be able to talk to someone else who understands more or less, you know, what you are going through, basically. Now, meeting with your supervisor. Supervision doesn't start until May, and this is after the assessment period is over. But you may contact your supervisors for an informal chat just before, or as soon as basically you are informed of the supervisors, you know, arrangements, so who you've been paired with in terms of supervisors. So the first meeting is normally an informal chat that doesn't count towards your 4 to 6 meetings, proper, supervisory meetings. Now, you only have 4 to 6 meetings, so use them wisely. Don't bunch them up all at the end or indeed all at the beginning, okay? Try to spread them out according to needs. Now, I have mentioned the summer support sessions. They will take place between June and August, although the timetable hasn't been set yet, but you will be, don't worry, you will be advised well in advance of their dates. At the time of speaking, I guess that we may still be in sort of virtual or remote condition. It's very difficult to know, but so all these sessions will be recorded anyway. It's impossible for me to say whether any will take place on campus. We don't have that knowledge at this stage. Okay, so assume that they don't. For that, it will be a set of recorded or live sessions, depending, but remote sessions. Now, what will these sessions cover? Well, as I mentioned earlier, writing a literature review and researching the literature. Okay. Followed by writing a methodology chapter. So looking at design and use of methods, not how to use specific methods, but how to use them to construct a research design and how to go about structuring your methodology chapter. And then there will be 2 sessions that will be focused on the methods and the use of methods. So one will be looking at quantitative data, statistical analysis, etc. And the other one will be looking at qualitative data analysis. Now, you can attend just one. One is compulsory. You can attend both sessions if you wish. Okay, it's up to you. Then there will be a session, some information, probably a pre-recorded session on academic integrity and referencing. And there will be a final session called the final edit, which is you've got now virtually all the pieces, there in place. How do we go about refining this so that you present really a well-integrated dissertation? I'm considering and hoping that I might be able to organize an optional session towards the beginning of those summer sessions, focus on project management, but I will confirm if this is possible near the time, okay? So the key dates are early May. We hope to let you have your supervision arrangements confirmed by then. So early to mid-May, think about organizing this informal meeting with your supervisor. Is get together, get to know each other, meeting. It will not be, you will not have a proper supervision meeting in this first meeting, unless exceptional circumstances, but normally that's not what it's there for. And then from about 17th of May onwards, the supervisory sessions can start. So that will be in agreement with your supervisor as and when you set those. On the 15th of July at the latest, you are allowed to submit 3 draft chapters. So that's chapter 1, 2, and 3, which correspond to the introduction, the literature review, and the methodology of your dissertation to your supervisor for comments. This is not compulsory, but it is highly recommended because this is your one opportunity for receiving comments on, I would say, a substantial piece of work, because 3 draft chapters is a substantial piece of work, and for, resetting some aspects if things aren't quite right, particularly and hopefully prior to you having started or indeed completed the fieldwork. So it is very much worth, submitting those chapters. Bear in mind also that you won't get an answer the next day. Supervisors are very busy. So think about submitting early before the 15th of July in agreement with your supervisor, and find out as well when you can hope to hear back from them, okay? Now, I would advise final supervisory meetings week commencing the 16th of August. You may have a meeting the following week, but you need to bear in mind what would be the use of that meeting in terms of, making significant alterations to your dissertation. Would you have a time to do that prior to submission? It's possible. So think about it. So final supervisory meeting advised week commencing the 16th, possibly week commencing the 23rd. It's up to you. And then that final submission date, I've just been advised this morning that it's the 13th of September 2021. So you may have seen a different date mentioned in other documents or communication, but as I say, it's just been confirmed to me that it's now the 13th of September. Right. So I hope that's given you an overview of how to move on from the project proposal and what needs doing, basically. Meanwhile, I hope it's the end of term, so I hope you have a lovely break, a lovely Easter break, and can get a little bit of rest. Thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.